India, as a rising global power, maintains diplomatic relations with most countries, but its history, security concerns, and geopolitical rivalries have led to tensions with several nations. In 2025, India's strained relationships stem from unresolved border disputes, terrorism threats, economic rivalries, and ideological differences. Countries like Pakistan and China remain India's primary adversaries due to territorial conflicts and security concerns. Nations such as Canada, Turkey, and Malaysia have worsened ties with India by interfering in its internal affairs, while growing Chinese influence in Nepal and Bangladesh has created friction. Additionally, disputes over migrant issues, religious tensions, and economic policies have further complicated relations with several countries. Here's a look at the top 10 countries that India hates in 2025 and the reasons behind their strained ties. 10. Nepal. India's relations with Nepal have been increasingly strained due to territorial disputes, political shifts, and growing Chinese influence in Kathmandu. The Kalapani-Limpiadura border issue remains a major point of contention, with Nepal claiming territories that India administers. In recent years, Nepal's communist-led governments have leaned closer to China, signing major infrastructure and trade agreements that diminish India's traditional influence in the country. India has viewed these developments with concern, especially as China invests heavily in Nepal's road and railway networks, reducing Nepal's economic dependence on India. Additionally, anti-India sentiments in Nepal, fueled by historical grievances and nationalist politics, have led to protests and government decisions that counter Indian interests. Despite these tensions, Nepal still relies on India for essential goods, employment opportunities, and financial remittances from Nepali workers in India. However, border restrictions and trade disputes have created friction. India has also expressed concerns over Nepal becoming a route for illegal activities, including smuggling and infiltration by anti-India elements. While cultural ties remain strong, political relations in 2025 are marked by mistrust, making it one of India's more difficult regional relationships. 9. Indonesia. India's relations with Indonesia have become complicated in 2025 due to religious tensions and economic competition. Indonesia's increasing inclination towards political Islam has led to diplomatic issues, especially as radical groups within the country have made anti-India statements regarding Kashmir and India's treatment of its Muslim population. Additionally, protests in Indonesia over India's domestic policies, such as the Citizenship Amendment Act, CAA, and alleged mistreatment of Indian Muslims, have caused friction between the two governments. Despite being part of regional alliances, Indonesia has strengthened trade and military ties with China, which India perceives as a strategic challenge in the Indo-Pacific. Furthermore, economic rivalry between the two nations has intensified, especially in sectors like palm oil exports, where India has begun reducing its dependence on Indonesian suppliers in favor of Malaysia and other sources. India has also been critical of Indonesia's stance on maritime disputes in the South China Sea, as it often aligns with China rather than regional democratic partners. While both nations engage in diplomatic talks, religious and political differences have strained ties, making the relationship uneasy in 2025. 8. Bangladesh. Despite historical and cultural ties, India's relationship with Bangladesh has seen tensions in 2025 due to issues related to illegal immigration, border security, and China's growing influence in Dhaka. One of the biggest concerns for India is the influx of illegal Bangladeshi migrants into Indian states like Assam and West Bengal, which has led to social and political conflicts. The implementation of the National Register of Citizens, NRC, in India has further fueled diplomatic disagreements, as Bangladesh refuses to take back alleged illegal migrants. Additionally, border clashes between Indian security forces and Bangladeshi civilians have resulted in diplomatic protests from both sides. Another point of contention is Bangladesh's increasing economic and military cooperation with China, which India perceives as a strategic threat. While India played a crucial role in Bangladesh's independence in 1971, Dhaka's growing alignment with Beijing for infrastructure and defense projects has created friction. However, trade and people-to-people ties remain strong, and India continues to supply Bangladesh with essential commodities. Despite economic cooperation, political mistrust persists in 2025, with India closely monitoring Bangladesh's strategic moves and its engagement with China and Pakistan. 7. Afghanistan. India's relations with Afghanistan remain strained in 2025 due to the Taliban's continued control over the country. Ever since the Taliban takeover in 2021, India has been deeply concerned about Afghanistan becoming a hub for terrorism that could spill over into Kashmir. The Taliban's close ties with Pakistan's intelligence agency, ISI, and its alleged sheltering of anti-India terror groups have made India wary of engaging with the Afghan government. Although India has provided humanitarian aid to the Afghan people, it has refused to officially recognize the Taliban regime, further distancing itself diplomatically. The destruction of Indian-funded infrastructure projects in Afghanistan and attacks on Indian interests by extremist factions have worsened ties. Additionally, Afghanistan's growing economic dependence on China and its role in the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, have further sidelined India in the region. The Taliban's strict enforcement of Sharia law and human rights violations, especially against women and minorities, have also drawn criticism from India, which has used international platforms to highlight these concerns. As of 2025, India maintains only a limited diplomatic presence in Afghanistan, focusing primarily on security monitoring rather than formal engagement. The relationship remains tense, with no prospects of improvement until a more stable and inclusive government emerges in Kabul. 6. Qatar. India's relations with Qatar have become strained in 2025 due to diplomatic tensions and legal issues involving Indian citizens. The relationship took a major hit when 8 former Indian Navy officers were sentenced to death in Qatar in 2023 on alleged espionage charges, leading to outrage in India. Although diplomatic efforts resulted in their release, the incident left a lasting impact on bilateral ties. Additionally, India has been critical of Qatar's growing ties with Pakistan, particularly in defense and energy cooperation. Qatar's funding of Islamist groups and its alleged influence on radical organizations operating in South Asia have also raised concerns in India. Despite these tensions, economic relations remain significant, as Qatar is one of India's largest suppliers of liquefied natural gas, LNG. However, India has been actively seeking alternative energy partners, such as the UAE and the US, to reduce dependency on Qatari imports. Another issue affecting ties is the treatment of Indian migrant workers in Qatar, with reports of exploitation and harsh working conditions creating negative sentiment in India. While people-to-people interactions continue due to a large Indian diaspora in Qatar, diplomatic relations remain fragile in 2025, with India closely monitoring Qatar's geopolitical moves and its stance on issues concerning South Asia. 5. Malaysia. India's relationship with Malaysia has soured over the years due to political disagreements, particularly over Kashmir and India's domestic policies. The strain began in 2019 when Malaysia's former Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad criticized India's move to revoke Article 370, which granted special status to Jammu and Kashmir. India responded by imposing restrictions on palm oil imports from Malaysia, significantly impacting its economy. Although subsequent Malaysian governments attempted to mend ties, political tensions persisted, especially as Malaysia continued to provide asylum to controversial Islamic preacher Zakir Naik, whom India has accused of spreading extremist ideologies. In 2025, diplomatic relations remain uneasy, with India keeping a close watch on Malaysia's political developments. Economic ties have suffered, with India reducing reliance on Malaysian exports while strengthening trade relations with Indonesia and Vietnam. Additionally, Malaysia's growing strategic partnership with Pakistan, particularly in defense cooperation, has further strained ties. The Indian government views Malaysia's stance as unnecessarily interfering in India's internal affairs. While people-to-people ties remain strong due to a significant Indian origin population in Malaysia, political and diplomatic relations between the two nations continue to be strained in 2025, with little sign of immediate improvement. 4. Turkey. India's relations with Turkey have remained tense in 2025, largely due to Turkey's vocal support for Pakistan on the Kashmir issue and its criticism of India's domestic policies. Since 2019, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has consistently raised the Kashmir dispute at international forums like the United Nations, often aligning with Pakistan's stance. This has deeply frustrated India, which views Kashmir as an internal matter. In response, India has downgraded its diplomatic engagement with Turkey and reduced defense and trade cooperation. Another point of contention is Turkey's growing ties with radical Islamist groups, some of which have been linked to anti-India propaganda and activities. Turkey has also increased its defense collaboration with Pakistan, supplying it with advanced drones and military equipment, which India perceives as a direct security threat. Additionally, Turkey's interference in India's internal matters, such as the Citizenship Amendment Act, CAA, and alleged human rights violations, has worsened relations. While bilateral trade continues, India has been actively looking to diversify its imports away from Turkish goods. India has also strengthened its alliances with Turkey's regional rivals, such as Greece and Armenia, to counterbalance Turkish aggression. As of 2025, Turkey remains one of India's most vocal critics, and any significant improvement in relations seems highly unlikely. 3. Canada. India's relations with Canada have deteriorated significantly in 2025, primarily due to Canada's perceived support for Khalistani separatists and its failure to take strict action against extremist elements advocating for Punjab secession. Tensions between the two nations reached a peak when Indian authorities accused Canada of harboring individuals linked to the Sikh separatist movement. The assassination of a Khalistani leader in Canada in 2023, which was attributed to Indian intelligence agencies, caused a major diplomatic standoff, leading to expulsion of diplomats and suspension of trade talks. India has repeatedly urged Canada to take stronger measures against radical elements spreading anti-India propaganda, but Canadian leaders have cited freedom of speech as a justification for allowing pro-Khalistan demonstrations. The strained relationship has also impacted economic ties, with India reducing its investment in Canadian resources and technology sectors. While Canada remains a popular destination for Indian students and professionals, rising diplomatic tensions have led to visa restrictions and delays. The Indian diaspora in Canada, which includes both pro-India and pro-Khalistan factions, has further complicated the situation, leading to occasional clashes and protests. Despite trade and people-to-people ties, political relations between India and Canada remain frosty in 2025, with little hope for immediate reconciliation. 2. China. India's relationship with China remains deeply strained in 2025, primarily due to the long-standing border disputes, economic rivalry, and China's growing influence in South Asia. Tensions escalated after multiple skirmishes in Ladakh and Arunachal Pradesh, where Chinese troops attempted to assert control over disputed territories. Despite diplomatic negotiations, China's expansionist policies, including its Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, and infrastructure development along the Line of Actual Control, LAC, continue to be a major concern for India. Additionally, China's military and economic support to Pakistan, including defense technology transfers, further aggravates India's security concerns. India has responded by strengthening its military presence along the border, investing in infrastructure projects in border regions, and enhancing strategic partnerships with countries like the US, Japan, and Australia under the Quad Alliance. Economically, India has been reducing its dependence on Chinese imports, imposing restrictions on Chinese apps and companies, and promoting domestic manufacturing under the Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative. However, China remains one of India's largest trade partners, making complete economic disengagement challenging. Beyond trade and military conflicts, geopolitical clashes in the Indo-Pacific and China's influence over neighboring countries like Nepal and Sri Lanka add to India's apprehensions. As of 2025, while diplomatic channels remain open, the India-China relationship is marked by deep mistrust and strategic competition. 1. Pakistan. India's relationship with Pakistan remains one of the most contentious in 2025 due to historical animosities, cross-border terrorism, and the unresolved Kashmir conflict. Since the partition in 1947, the two nations have fought multiple wars and engaged in numerous skirmishes along the Line of Control, LoC. In recent years, Pakistan's alleged support for militant groups operating in Jammu and Kashmir has continued to strain ties, with India accusing its neighbor of harboring terrorists responsible for attacks on Indian soil. Diplomatic relations remain tense, with both nations frequently engaging in verbal and strategic conflicts on global platforms. India has also been critical of Pakistan's growing alliance with China, particularly regarding the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC, which runs through disputed territory. Despite occasional peace overtures and back-channel negotiations, mistrust runs deep, and nationalistic fervor in both countries prevents meaningful reconciliation. Trade between the two nations remains limited, with India imposing economic restrictions in response to Pakistan's alleged involvement in cross-border militancy. Meanwhile, repeated ceasefire violations and espionage allegations keep relations on edge. While people-to-people ties exist through shared cultural and linguistic heritage, the political divide remains significant. As of 2025, India continues to strengthen its military presence along the border, making any immediate resolution unlikely. Indo-Pak relations remain a defining and volatile element of South Asian geopolitics.